The message came just as I turned off the highway. Kitchen entrance, please. Important guest today, you know how you look after work. No punctuation, no greeting. Just the familiar clipped tone my mother used when pretending her instructions were requests. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering over a reply that never came. Then, I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket and turned onto the familiar gravel driveway. The house hadn't changed. White colonial, pristine hedges, imported stone pavers that my sister once claimed were French-inspired, as if Vermont granite was somehow inferior. I parked near the side fence just out of view from the main road. My truck looked more out of place than usual. The gray paint was scratched from a week's worth of hauling drywall, and one headlight was still foggy from a run-in with a utility pole last month. But it ran clean and it worked hard like me. In the passenger seat, the bottle of wine rested carefully inside a cloth bag. A 1992 Bordeaux. Cost more than most families' Thanksgiving dinner. I'd bought it last month not out of sentiment but intention. They wouldn't see me, but I'd know. I walked past the front of the house. Through the large bay windows, I saw my sister Tessa floating through the living room in one of her soft cream sweater dresses, gesturing elegantly with a champagne flute as guests leaned in. Darren, her husband, laughed at something I couldn't hear, teeth-perfect eyes scanning for an audience. The chandelier above them bathed the room in golden light. It all looked so curated, like the cover of a lifestyle magazine, except it was real. Or at least they believed it was. The side gate creaked as I passed through. Behind the house, the back door was already propped open, warm air spilling into the cold. The smell of turkey and clove-spiced cranberries pulled me forward. I stepped into the kitchen and placed the bottle gently on the counter. Aunt Lenore turned from the oven, a smile already stretching across her face. "Rhea," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of cinnamon and something softer, maybe nutmeg. "You're here." "Would have been hard to miss," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Figured I'd take the route reserved for staff." She paused, hands still on my arms. "You okay? I'm used to it." I began to unpack the wine, moving with a quiet efficiency I'd mastered in homes that didn't expect me to stay long. Lenore nodded slowly, then turned back to basting. From the front of the house, I heard laughter, my father's voice rising above the others. I imagined them toasting to family. I stayed in the kitchen. For now. I watched Lenore arrange rolls on a silver tray. She always moved like she had all the time in the world. "They still think you're managing rentals part-time?" she asked. "They think I fix leaky faucets." Still, I smiled without amusement. "It's easier that way." She glanced toward the dining room, but not forever. I turned to grab the wine opener, already knowing what was coming next. The kitchen smelled like nostalgia, rosemary, sage, burnt sugar, and something colder underneath, something I could never name but always felt. I followed Aunt Lenore into the hallway, carrying a silver tray of stuffed mushrooms. My boots muffled against the polished floors, and for a second I saw my reflection in the glass of a family portrait. Arms full, eyes down, sleeves still speckled from a drywall patch I'd fixed that morning. I didn't belong in that frame. I never had. The dining room opened like a stage. Chandeliers glittered above the table. The china was out, the real set, the one Mom only used when there were outsiders to impress. Candles flickered between flowers that didn't smell like anything. They were arranged not alive. Tessa stood at the far end, her voice lilting just loud enough to carry. "Yes, she's doing a little handyman thing. Very local. She fixes things. You know, pipes? Locks. It's sweet." A guest nodded politely. Darren added, "There's honest work in the trades. Not everyone's built for corporate stress." He smiled like he was giving me a medal. I kept my hands steady as I set the tray down, ignoring the sudden pause in conversation. I'd learned not to flinch when they tossed their compliments like crumbs enough to pretend they saw me, never enough to fill me. Mr. Barlow, a neighbor I vaguely remembered, picked up a mushroom and said warmly, "Delicious, Rhea." "Thank you," I said, because that was the script. Mom floated over her pearls, catching the light. "Darling, once you're done here, help Vivian refill the drinks. We're trying to keep things seamless tonight." "Of course." I turned before she could notice the wine I'd brought, forgotten now, beside the kitchen sink, unopened. Back in the hallway, I caught the faint sound of Tessa again laughing softly. She's good with her hands, always was practical. I guess we all find our own lanes right. It was the kind of statement that meant nothing and everything smooth enough to escape objection, but sharp enough to cut. I could feel Aunt Lenore watching me as I walked back into the kitchen, my spine straight and my jaw locked. I set the tray on the counter and reached for the next one without being asked. The back door creaked open behind me as I slid the second tray of appetizers onto the counter. I didn't turn until I heard the familiar voice. "Well, would you look at that?" Mrs. Nolan said brightly. "Didn't recognize you out of your office clothes, boss." I froze. Aunt Lenore's spoon hovered midair. My mother, standing near the sink, arranging cheese crackers with surgical precision, went completely still. The warmth in the kitchen evaporated in an instant. Even the faint clatter of plates from the dining room seemed to quiet. Mrs. Nolan stepped in fully arms wrapped around a covered glass dish. "I hope it's all right. I brought my sweet potato casserole," Patricia insisted. I didn't want to interrupt the party out front. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me again, her face broke into the smile she always wore when I came by her building. "It's good to see you, Rhea. How's everything going at the Church Street property? Did the elevator company get back to you?" I glanced at Aunt Lenore, who blinked once slowly. "They did," I said evenly. "Inspections scheduled for next Thursday." "Oh, perfect," she beamed. "Always on top of things, just like usual. You know," she added, turning to my mother as if she were letting her in on something sweet. "Your daughter is the best property manager I've ever had. 3 years now, buildings never looked better, and so fair with rent, not like some of these corporate types." My mother's smile held, but just barely. Her eyes flicked from me to Mrs. Nolan, then back again. "You—" "Rent from Rhea, I do, Mrs." Nolan said proudly. "She owns my building, and quite a few others, I hear." "Reeves' property right." Aunt Lenore set her spoon down quietly and took a step back. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to hide, not anymore. Mrs. Nolan had just dropped the match into a room full of gas, and she didn't even realize it. From the dining room, the faint sound of a fork clinking against glass rang out, followed by a sudden hush. Voices lowered, then stopped. And I knew without looking that they'd all heard. I didn't plan to speak. I never did. But the silence that followed Mrs. Nolan's cheerful reveal stretched so long it began to feel like consent. So I cleared my throat. I started with a duplex, I said quietly at first. Bought it with inheritance money after Grandma Mallon passed. It needed work, roof leaks, old plumbing, one unit hadn't been touched since the 80s. I did most of the renovations myself. My mother blinked as if hearing another language. My father had wandered into the kitchen midway through and now stood against the wall like a guest in his own house. Aunt Lenore didn't move. I rented both units out, saved every dollar I could, and used the income to buy the next place. I partnered with Marcus Webb. 2 years later, we formed Reeves & Webb Property Management. We now own 6 buildings outright and manage over 40 commercial and residential properties throughout Vermont. Tessa let out a sharp laugh, short and bright. "You're joking." "I grossed $2.4 million last year," I continued. "Not net, but our margins are strong, 38%. Darren, who had just entered with a glass of wine, raised an eyebrow. "That's unusually high. We do our own maintenance, tenant screening, and project management. Minimal outsourcing, low turnover, high retention. We run lean, and we know the value of every screw." My mother finally found her voice. "But you fix toilets." "I also own the buildings those toilets are in," Tessa scoffed. "And yet you dress like that?" I looked down at my jeans and boots. "They're practical." "I was on a site visit this morning." Dad stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Rhea, why wouldn't you tell us? Because when I told you I was doing okay, you assumed I meant surviving. Not building. It was easier to let you believe what you wanted than explain something you'd already decided wasn't possible." No one spoke. Even Mrs. Nolan had gone still, clearly realizing she'd walked into something bigger than a casserole delivery. I almost felt sorry for her. I stepped past my father and picked up the tray of untouched deviled eggs. "I'll take this into the dining room." Behind me, no one moved. 3 days later, I was back in the same house, seated in the living room like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. This time, there were no casseroles or candles, just folders on the coffee table, a legal pad, and Darren in full performance mode. He clicked the remote, revealing a slide deck on the TV. So the Boston Group is actively seeking partners with existing property portfolios in mid-sized markets. Burlington's primed for mixed-use expansion, retail below, residential above. We'd enter as a family-backed entity. High equity, strong leverage, quick ROI. He looked proud of the acronyms. Which brings us to your holdings, he continued, glancing at me. Your properties have a combined value north of $10 million. If you collateralize a portion, we can unlock up to $8 million in capital to co-invest. You and Marcus would stay on as operators, of course. But we'd have structure. Support, Tessa added. We can finally do something together. I looked at the lineup, Dad sitting stiffly in his leather chair, Mom twisting the ring on her finger, Tessa practically glowing. Darren stood beside the screen like he was closing a client, and Aunt Lenore sunk low in the corner armchair, eyes quietly pleading with me not to speak too soon. I leaned back. You want me to use my buildings as collateral for a deal with people I've never met in a city I haven't vetted based on projections from your slides? Darren smiled, patronizing. They're not just projections. I've run the comps. With your portfolio, you'll triple your net worth in 2 years. And who's providing the other half of this capital? Dad cleared his throat. That's the beauty of it. Everyone contributes what they can. The rest is from the Boston Group. We all share in the growth. I looked at Mom. She didn't meet my eyes. I looked at Tessa, who was already imagining a penthouse in Back Bay. And then I looked at Lenore, who didn't say a word, but her knuckles were white against her teacup. I sat forward, calm. Let me guess. You didn't call this meeting to include me. You called it because now I have something you think you can use. Darren blinked. Tessa shifted. Dad said nothing. I stood. Thanks for the pitch. Let me know when you're ready to talk about something real. No, I said, flat and steady. The room didn't move at first. It was like they hadn't expected me to speak at all, as if my refusal should have come with an apology, or at least a softened version of itself. But I gave them neither. Dad cleared his throat. We're just trying to help. I looked at him. You weren't helping when you told me to use the back door. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was offense. Tessa's face tightened. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. Darren stared at the carpet like he hadn't heard me, but Aunt Lenore shifted in her chair and nodded once, barely perceptible but deliberate. Mom finally spoke, her voice quiet and clipped. You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be. No, I said again. I'm making it honest. You don't want to be part of what I built. You want to benefit from it without ever having seen the work that went into it. Tessa stood abruptly. That's unfair, is it? You laughed at the idea of my business a week ago. Now you want me to risk it all so you can get in on the upside. Darren raised a hand, performative calm. We're not asking you to risk it. We're offering opportunity. You're offering pressure, wrapped in entitlement. Dad looked at me, his eyes narrowing like he was seeing something unfamiliar. You've changed. I've stopped pretending. No one said anything after that. The meeting unraveled with an awkward clatter, papers shuffled, glasses drained, throats cleared. The energy had shifted. I wasn't supposed to push back. I was supposed to quietly comply, play the grateful daughter who finally got her chance at the adult table. Instead, I walked to the front door, not the back. Aunt Lenore met me in the entryway. She didn't say much, just touched my arm and whispered, Good. Outside, the air had turned colder. I stood on the porch for a long second before stepping into it, the silence of the house still pressing at my back. By the time I reached my truck, I knew they weren't done. They'd just changed their approach. It started with a call from the housing authority. Miss Mallon, we've received several complaints about code violations at your properties. We'll need to schedule inspections, immediate access to all residential units by Monday. I sat there, phone to my ear, staring at my neatly organized maintenance logs. What kind of complaints? Mold, broken locks, inadequate heat, unlicensed workers. The reports are anonymous but detailed. I confirmed the inspection schedule, hung up, and sat still long enough for my coffee to go cold. An hour later, my insurance broker called. "Rhea, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've gotten some chatter about possible liability issues, something about non-compliant repairs, missing permits. Not formal, not yet, but underwriters are nervous." I opened my laptop. Dozens of new reviews had flooded my business pages overnight, every platform. 1-star ratings with fabricated horror stories, mold pest infestations, retaliatory evictions. All written with just enough specificity to sound plausible. I texted Marcus something's up. "Meet me at the office." By the time he arrived, 2 tenants had left voicemails. Both said they'd received strange calls from people claiming to be with a tenant advocacy nonprofit, asking pointed questions. Did they feel safe? Had they ever been denied repairs? Were they afraid to speak up? "They wanted me to say you were threatening," one said, her voice shaking. "But you've always been respectful." I told them that. They hung up. It kept coming. More calls, more reviews. A supplier emailed to ask if we were still in good standing. Our cleaning contractor canceled their retainer citing concerns. Marcus paced the office trying to hide how angry he was. This is organized. Someone knows how to hit every weak point. I already knew who. Tyler had asked about property codes during the meeting, offered to review our liability policies, casually mentioned our tenant demographics. He'd been framing it as interest, due diligence. It was never interest. It was intel. He was going to bury me in paperwork noise and doubt until I came crawling back to accept their deal. I pulled up our documentation folders and started drafting a public statement. I wasn't going to crawl. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who was pulling the strings. We spent the weekend compiling everything: maintenance logs, inspection reports, emails from tenants, screenshots of reviews posted within minutes of each other from accounts with no history, voicemails, call logs. We traced 2 of the numbers to burner phones. One had called not just my tenants, but another landlord Marcus knew in Bar. Same script, same tactics. I drafted a letter. Not just a defense and exposure. I named the pattern. I described the harassment. I included facts, dates, metrics. And then I wrote the part they'd hate the most, the truth about how I'd built my business without family money, without shortcuts, and without ever needing to exploit anyone. Marcus read the draft twice. "You're sure about this?" They thought I'd fold quietly. That's not going to happen. He hesitated, fingers hovering above the mouse. "This could get ugly." "It already is," I said. "Let them see what ugly looks like when it's exposed to daylight." He clicked send. The file uploaded. The full-page ad was scheduled for Wednesday's Burlington Business Journal. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. But I did feel something sharper control. They wanted me to panic, to beg, to shrink. Instead, I just printed the first chapter of the story they didn't want anyone else to read. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. A reporter from the Burlington Free Press wanted comment. A tenant from Church Street called to say thank you. A local business owner I didn't know left a voicemail. "I've been through the same thing. You just gave the rest of us a spine." Tyler's name trended on local forums for all the wrong reasons. One of his clients issued a statement withdrawing from their partnership. By the end of the day, his firm had suspended him pending an internal review. The housing authority called to say all inspections were clear, no violations substantiated. I already knew they wouldn't find any. The silence from my family didn't last long. My father called around 5. "No hello, just, this is humiliating." I let the pause hang before answering. "You only cared once I had something you could use." That's not. I hung up before he could finish. There was no guilt this time, no weight pressing between my shoulders, no imagined obligation to smooth things over. Just stillness, and under it, a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in years. They'd tried to make me invisible. I'd made myself undeniable, and I wasn't done yet. The wind coming off the lake was brisk, but I liked the sting of it. It reminded me I was still here, solid, steady, standing on ground I owned. The new development site stretched behind me, flagged for surveyors, and ready for a future that no one else got to dictate. 6 months ago, they tried to erase me. Now, I was negotiating a 10-year lease with one of the fastest-growing wellness brands in the state. The same tenants who once felt nervous about speaking up now sent holiday cards and forwarded referrals. My inbox was full, not of complaints, but of thank yous. My phone buzzed, a message from Aunt Lenore proud of you. Dinner soon, I typed back before I could overthink it, my treat. Downtown this time. Down. She replied with a heart, and I let the smile stay. The family I was born into had never seen me. But the community I chose, the tenants who trusted me, the partners who built beside me, they saw everything. Not because I made noise, but because I kept showing up even when the door was slammed shut. This wasn't the story my family wrote for me. It was the one I rewrote blueprint by blueprint, brick by brick. And in this version, I wasn't invited in. I built the house myself,